But first, to our main story.
Zambians are set to go to the polls in what is seen as a crucial election for the future direction of the African nation.
Yes, that's right. Finally on Newsfighters tonight, we're doing a deep dive on the Zambia election. Will President Edgar Lungu receive a second term? No, just kidding, of course. There's nothing else to talk about, so once again, I'm covering New South Wales's
Delta farce.
Yes, we're in our 7th week of lockdown in Sydney now, and with the Olympics over, I guess for distraction, I'm finally going to have to bite the bullet and start watching reality TV. And this promo for The Block actually really excited me.
Monday, must-see bathroom week begins.
Yes, coincidentally, bathroom week is also how I'll be spending my annual leave this year. Just kidding. I've never had annual leave in my life. Anyways, I'm over this crap. I don't know about you. I'm just over it. I'm tired of COVID. I'm tired of the depressing news every day. Let's just play the depressing montage of clips that shows how badly New South Wales stuffed up the Delta outbreak this week. Roll it.
Gladys Berejiklian has effectively abandoned her target of 0 COVID cases as the Delta strain spread to a record number of people today.
This is clearly our third wave.
Overnight, there were 390 new cases recorded.
Less than half of today's cases were isolating while they were sick.
What we are doing isn't working.
It's going to be a rocky few months ahead for New South Wales.
The Premier has revealed life won't start returning to normal until November.
Fears lockdown conditions could extend till Christmas.
The New South Wales government saying today the health system is under stress.
It couldn't be worse. Not right now.
Yes, with Australia basically in its third wave and COVID-0 more or less abandoned, Australia has officially reversed Steve Bradbury'd the pandemic. We were within sight of the finish line and we've tripped and fallen and let New Zealand win the race. New Zealand! Yes, and here's New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian summing up where we're at.
You're all gonna die!
Sorry, wrong clip. Here it is.
We now have to live with Delta in one way or another, and that's pretty obvious. And with case numbers where they are, unfortunately, if you live in those local government areas of concern, there is a high chance now that you could get the virus.
Yes, good job, New South Wales. So in summary,
you're all gonna
get the virus.
Thanks, Premier. It's all very depressing right now. I wish someone could just take me back to the beginning of this outbreak when all we cared about were those hilarious sunbakers who startled the deer. Those were the good old days.
2 men sunbaking nude on a beach on the south coast, apparently caught after they were startled by a deer.
They were caught buck naked.
Buck naked.
That old one.
The men were chased into the Royal National Park and got lost.
Sparking a search by the SES, paramedics and police helicopter.
Each fined a cheeky $1,000.
Certainly a story that raises more questions than answers.
So anyways, back to today, and things have been getting a bit out of control this week with Delta spreading absolutely everywhere, even to places nobody wants to go.
Well, Canberra's first local COVID case in over a year has sent the ACT into a 7-day lockdown.
The ACT will enter into a 7-day lockdown from 5 p.m. tonight. We also have positive wastewater detections around the ACT.
Yes, hard to believe they managed to detect COVID in the Canberra wastewater over all the weed and fireworks in there. Yes, and with lockdown now, people in Canberra are going to have to do absolutely nothing but at home for a change. Ugh, and I can say that because I lived in Canberra. Thankfully, there has been one upside.
Scott Morrison has an election looming within a year, and he now can't travel the country he governs for the foreseeable future.
Ah, what a shame. COVID's also spreading into rural New South Wales, sending even more places into lockdown.
An outbreak in Dubbo has seen the city go into a 7-day lockdown.
Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry, what? City of Dubbo? Have you even been to Dubbo? That's a little bit generous, don't you think? Lockdowns have even spread to the country music region of rural New South Wales, as if life wasn't depressing there enough already.
Also under lockdown, Armidale and Tamworth.
As a precaution, the health experts have recommended that we lock down Tamworth for 1 week.
Yes, now the men, women, children and dogs of Tamworth and Armidale are now hiding in their homes. And it's not just because Barnaby Joyce is in the area like usual. In fact, most of the population of New South Wales is now in lockdown, but we like to roll our lockdowns out very, very slowly here, like an art house film release or a life-saving vaccine.
From Byron to Burke to Shell Harbour and the entirety of Greater Sydney and Hunter Valley, around 90% of the New South Wales population is now locked down.
The local government areas of Walgett,
Bogan, Burke, Brewarrina, Coonamble, Gilgandra, Narromine and Warren will all be under the stay-at-home orders.
If you're having trouble keeping track of where in New South Wales is in lockdown, I recommend setting it to that I've Been Everywhere song.
I've been everywhere. Been to Tullamore, Seymour, Lismore, Mooloolaba.
Walgett, Bogan, Burke, Brewarrina, Coonamble, Gilgandra, Narromine and Warren.
I've been everywhere, man.
So where did the virus originate from? Well, you won't be surprised to learn that, like all horrible things, it originated from Sydney.
Almost all regional exposures during this outbreak can be linked to Sydney. An infected worker went to the Central West. A young man spreading the virus to Newcastle after going to a party nearby. That outbreak's led to exposures in Armidale and Tamworth. Another man's visit placing Byron Bay in lockdown. The spread intensifying calls for a ring of steel around the city. Police checkpoints on all major roads out.
Yes, experts are saying a ring of steel could help stop the virus spreading out to our vulnerable and under-resourced rural communities. What do you think of that idea, Premier?
The Premier's rejecting calls for a ring of steel around Sydney.
Unless you have literally a police officer outside every single household in New South Wales or on every single road, a ring of steel does not prevent Delta from seeping out.
Yes, forgetting the fact that thanks to our obsession with tollways in this state, Sydney actually only does have like 5 main roads out of it. But anyways, yes, Premier Berejiklian was firmly against a ring of steel for a very long time, but on Friday night actually announced a paper form of steel, a kind of paperwork permit of steel, if you will.
It's expected also a permit system will be introduced for people who want to leave Sydney, with police checking drivers on major highways out of the city.
Yes, like everything in this outbreak, New South Wales has finally adopted a reactive solution about 6 weeks too late and done slightly differently, so it doesn't appear like we copied what Victoria did last year. Good job. Hey, and speaking of which, Gladys is also against another solution Melbourne had last year.
But the Premier is refusing to order a ring of steel surrounding Sydney or a nighttime curfew.
If we thought that they would have a significant or even marginal impact, of course we'd do those things, but there is no evidence to suggest that's the case.
True, though, a curfew might help stop my dodgy neighbours from having people over every single night and the police not caring. I'm sure it could definitely have a marginal impact on stopping a COVID outbreak in my apartment block, which is feeling pretty inevitable these days. Look, I don't want a curfew more than anyone, but I reckon with these case numbers, New South Wales should probably be trying anything and everything that Victoria did, and more. And COVID isn't just taking over our regions, it's also taking over our regional delicacies.
Tonight, thousands of KFC customers are ordered to isolate as staff test positive.
A dozen staff at the KFC on Canterbury Road at Punch Bowl now have the virus. Anyone who visited the store at any time last week is now a close contact.
Of course, the obvious problem with getting COVID-19 at a KFC is that if you start suffering from a fever, headache, chills and diarrhea, you automatically just blame the KFC you ate. The KFC outbreak highlights that much of the transmission happening in Sydney at the moment is in workplaces. In fact, my local independent chicken shop near where I live closed last Sunday due to a positive COVID case in a worker. And as of Friday night when I'm recording this, it's still not listed on the New South Wales Health Exposure site list. So good job on the contact tracing there, guys. Really instilling confidence. Here's New South Wales Chief Health Officer Kerry Chant discussing how our workplaces are fueling the growth of this outbreak.
This highlights you have one person introduce it to a workplace. If you then have 12 people that become infected because we don't all maintain our social distancing, and then each of those 12 people will go back to their households and introduce it into their households, and then you'll get that cycle of household transmission.
Yes, too many workplaces and businesses are open, fueling the outbreak, but that's actually the priority from this government. Remember this?
Why is Bunnings open? It's not open in Queensland.
Next question.
Why is Bunnings open?
Yes, and some people are going to work when they're sick because they're not even aware that there's a $1,500 paid pandemic leave payment that they can access because the state government isn't telling them.
Do contact tracers tell them that they are eligible for financial assistance while they quarantine for 14 days?
That's a good question. I'll have to double check that information.
9 News has confirmed that information is not regularly passed on.
And while New South Wales has been standing firm for over a year now on not paying people to test and isolate like Victoria did last year, Looks like this could be about to change.
News is that anyone from Monday who loses wages while waiting for a COVID test result will be eligible for a $320 payment. Now, this will only apply to those living in designated hot zones, and the government is promising people will receive the money within 2 days.
Yes, sadly, $120 less than what Victorians got last year, and it only applies to the hotspot LGAs. So, hey, if you live 2 blocks away from one of those, sorry, no money for you. So with our biggest problem being too many people are still allowed to go to work and many workplaces still allowed to operate at full capacity, the New South Wales government decided to blame rule breakers.
Today, the Premier took aim at the people continuing to ignore the rules.
Let's not pretend that people are doing the right thing. People are knowingly doing the wrong thing and pretending it's because they didn't understand. Delta does not leave any room for error.
The Premier blames people breaking the stay-at-home order.
We also have to accept that part of the challenge we have in New South Wales is because of lack of compliance.
If people just applied the rules, if they complied with the rules and the law, and they applied an element of common sense and a modicum of decency to the rest of the community, we would be fine. If people just stuck with what they were asked to do, this Delta virus would be finding itself being beaten back into submission.
Oh, and it's much more fun to blame a few bad individuals for doing the wrong thing when the actual problem is your deep-seated systemic addiction to individualism and big business. The New South Wales government is clearly consulting more business leaders than essential workers during this outbreak.
And can I firstly thank industry for really stepping up. The stakeholders in business who've spoken to government about how we can get workers back to work, especially from those areas of high concern at the moment, has been very positive and constructive. And can I please thank all of business leaders, community leaders who've supported us in our efforts.
Yes, the real heroes of this pandemic really were the business leaders and stakeholders. Remember when in the early days of the pandemic, we all stood on our balconies and applauded the business leaders? Yes, thank you, business leaders, for trying to get as many of your workers back to work when it's clearly not safe to do so. Cheers. Oh, and case numbers got so high in Sydney this week that the government allowed even more people to go back to work.
Thousands of Sydney tradies were back at work today after a COVID layoff that cost them 3.5 weeks' pay and the Sydney economy billions of dollars. Some still need vaccinations, but business leaders say even a partial return is a boost for everyone.
Yes, an actual first in this pandemic here in Australia in allowing vaccinated workers back to work first. So I assume that it's all tradies working in these areas that have to be vaccinated, right? Oh no, wrong.
The Canterbury Bankstown Mayor says unvaccinated construction workers from outside the hot zones can still work where they want.
They could potentially bring the virus with them and vice versa.
Oh great, well I guess we know how COVID is spreading all around Sydney then. Good job. Yes, and as New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard says, this making sure everyone goes to work all the time is all about balance.
As I said yesterday, we've tried to balance all the way along through this, keeping our economy open, trying to address mental health.
Yes, the New South Wales government cares about your mental health, except of course if you're grieving a lost loved one.
The city's biggest cemetery closes its gates to stop rule breaking.
Rookwood Cemetery, a heartbreaking example of Sydney's life and death struggle.
Brad Hazzard says, why can't they just go and grieve at a Bunnings like a normal person? Keep the flame alive for a loved one with a discounted tiki torch. So with case numbers in New South Wales still going up due to them locking down too late and refusing to institute a lockdown as hard as Victoria did last year, the Premier's solution has turned from getting cases down to vaccinating our way out.
The Premier is banking on vaccinations to bring this crisis under control.
The Premier claims we need more vaccinations, not tougher lockdown rules.
With no end in sight to this outbreak, the Premier is warning the most challenging months are yet to come until the state reaches 70% double-dose vaccination.
And can I again issue a plea to say, if you want to get back to work, if you want to get back to normal life, please get vaccinated. Vaccination is key to what we can do potentially in September and October. This has been the experience overseas in provinces throughout Canada, that a targeted vaccination program in those areas of concern has strong evidence of reducing the spread and allowing communities to live more freely. And that's why we're really appealing to people to consider their options.
Oh yes, let's follow the Canadian example. I did a whole episode on this earlier in the year. Let me cast my mind back. Oh, now I recall. That's right. Ontario had 9,000 deaths and reached 4,000 cases a day during Toronto's 8-month lockdown, which saw inside dining in some restaurants closed for over a year and children's hospitals forced to admit adult patients into their ICUs, all because their similarly pro-business, pro-freedom Premier Doug Ford refused to lock down early and hard and tried to vaccinate his way out. That's a great example for you to follow, you absolute morons. And that was only with the Alpha variant.
We're trying to, as I mentioned yesterday, Rob, we're trying to have this happy balance, and it's extremely hard. I've never been in favor of a curfew, and I'm going to tell you the reason why I've never been in favor of a curfew, and that's a hard lockdown. Cars aren't driving around, nothing at all, because I believe in the people of Ontario. And as soon as you tell the people of Ontario you've lost trust and we're going to have police chasing you down the street when you're driving, that's it, it's game over. You might as well throw in the white flag. Please just follow the protocols.
And much like Doug Ford in Ontario, instead of taking responsibility for their own delays, errors, politically biased, bad decision-making, and a total lack of understanding of how everyday people live in the state, the New South Wales government is just blaming their own constituents.
Good evening. Stupidity, arrogance and entitlement. That's what the Health Minister says is causing our COVID numbers to spike.
You can't legislate against stupidity, arrogance and entitlement.
Yes, that's right. You can't legislate against stupidity, arrogance and entitlement, but you can vote it out at the next state election.
Newsfighters, Australia's funniest news summary podcast.